Hey everyone, welcome to In Focus Videocast with Adam Goldberg Photography and Joseph Roybal Photography. I'm Adam.
Hey guys, I'm Joe. Joseph, how's it going?
Yeah, we hope you all are doing well. We have a pretty good episode, I think, today that people talk about a lot. So we're going to be talking about pricing and how to price yourself. Joe and I are going to have, I think, a fairly frank conversation about some of our pricing and kind of some different ways to think about how to price yourself. Because I think pricing is like a big thing that people in the photography industry talk about all the time. And you and I text and talk and call about a lot to each other about like, hey, what do you think about this for pricing and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that we talk about all the time. Like, you said between us or ourselves, and then also, I talk to other friends about it all the time. You know, I had just like, and I think what kind of spurred or sparked this kind of conversation or this topic today was, Adam, you had reached out, or we always do, but then I had a guy reach out to me here, a kid from college, and he asked like, hey, how do you kind of price yourself as a landscape photographer? So it just kind of was like the impetus for this to kind of come about today. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. So you do landscape photography. So you do prints and workshops, and I do architecture and real estate stuff. So those are the two genres I think we're gonna focus on here, but hoping that a lot of what we talk about here can apply to other, specific niches of photography as well.
Totally. And then they're also, these are a little bit of, how I, and like I know, Adam, you're going to talk a little bit about yours, but these are how I have approached my pricing structure and some of the things that I do. And it's always evolving, it's always a process. And so keeping that in mind, even when, the listeners here and watchers, and when you're kind of going about yours, it's just kind of, these are some of the things that we've thought of and are currently doing. So, taking it and making it your own, but also just trying to giving a little bit of that, bumper bowling, if you will, kind of get you down the path and start you off.
Yeah. And I'll go first if you're okay with that. But before I do, one thing I want to say too is that everybody's situation is going to be different. How well your name is known within your market, what kind of market you are in, whether you're in a small town, large town, big city, supply demand. There's so many different factors that go into how you can price yourself, that it's just, what we're saying here is kind of how we go about it. And hopefully, again, it gives you some tools to go ahead and make some informed decisions around pricing your own photography, being able to use kind of ours as maybe a baseline.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, these are things that are all large determining factors in yours and mine, here in Denver, because it all varies, and how saturated the market is.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, go for it. Go ahead
All
and
right. So you and I are both licensed drone pilots. So I'm actually going to start there. So we both have our FAA Part 107 license, which means that we can fly our drones commercially. Essentially, that means we can charge money to fly our drone, which is pretty cool. Get paid to fly a drone. For that work, whether it's video, whether it's photography for architecture, my rate is $250 an hour with a minimum of 2 hours. And that usually, depending on the situation, gets anywhere between about 3 to 4 flights worth of drone work for that work. I know there's a lot of people out there who, on the drone side, they do work for third-party companies and they're making 50, 75 bucks a shoot. I feel that there's just so much value that we have as a licensed drone photographer that I rarely, when I'm doing, again, video or architecture photography, go much less than that.
That's good to know, because there are those companies out there that like the real estate companies. What's the one that we've talked about in the past that I hadn't heard of until someone had mentioned it to me, and then I asked you about it, and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, the like the vacuum, the life suck or something. What's that one
Yeah,
called?
and people also, they go on, there's Thumbtack and stuff like that, where people go on Thumbtack and be like, I want a drone photographer for this. And it's like, it's the lowest common denominator. I
Yeah,
think that's something that for all of the photography that we're going to talk about, you know, there's value in what you do, whether you're a licensed drone photographer or you're doing on ground photography, doing whatever, you have a skill. Like, you should be able to
right.
charge for that. And so if we're just continuing to chase the lowest common denominator to get your foot in the door, that's not necessarily the best way from a long-term perspective to have a successful business.
Correct. Yeah, and yeah, because I mean, to be honest, the initial, getting your drone license, your 107, isn't exactly easy. I mean, it's not hard, in
Yeah.
a way, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of studying and a lot of time. And so,
And you got to renew it every 2 years.
you got to renew it every 2 years. And it's just about as much studying every 2 years as it takes the first time. I mean, you get some of those, like, those ideas in your mind, like what's elevation, what's all these rules. But at the same time, they're always throwing stupid curveballs at you that, and I know a lot of drone photographers out there that they kind of fly under the radar because they don't have the 107 and they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a piece of it too, is, again, you're licensed, you have a skill, there's insurance, there's all sorts of things involved. So know your
okay,
value, find out what your market is, what you can, charge. And some of it may be volume based too. So, I mean, you may be able to charge less because you're going out and doing multiple shoots in a day. And so, you can get by with doing less. So again,
right.
this is kind of where I'm coming from on the drone piece. So
Well, I think that's great. And real quick, not to interrupt, but to interrupt, one of the things that I found, even when I've been out doing stuff with drone work, is that sometimes I won't take into consideration, or I have in the past not taken into consideration, what if my drone crashed and I've only charged this person $75 or
yeah.
something.
Mm,
It's like, when you think about like the cost of repair, even if you have business insurance, like you and I both do, like it makes sense to, just factoring, keeping that in mind, because they're not fail safe entities. Sometimes these
yeah.
things go off and they whiz off, and if you had to
Well,
replace them.
that though, yeah, I mean, and that goes for any of what you're charging for any of your
Well,
photography.
it's everything.
There's
There's
equipment
tax.
costs that go with it, and it's the computer, it's the camera, it's the hard drives and everything else.
Yeah,
That costs money, and then you're gonna have to replace them every couple of years. So keep that in mind as you're kind of planning and thinking about how much you're gonna charge for stuff.
perfect. All right, so drone,
So that was drone.
250 an hour.
I'd
So
be
that's
only
great.
only I'm going to add one more thing to drone, and then that's going to tie in nicely to my next one. For
Okay.
real estate, straight real estate photography, MLS for a real estate agent, I do charge less because I just tack it on to a shoot that I'm already at. And again, it's a one-time license for just posting on MLS.
Yep.
So that's
Okay.
that. So then that's the drone. For on the ground real estate photography, um, in my market, where I'm at in my career, I don't leave the house for less than $200. And that is taking into account, any mileage, all sorts of things. If I'm going to outsource some of the editing, I need to net $200 at the end of the shoot, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so you said 200, correct?
Yeah, so 200 is kind of my baseline number on that.
Okay.
Um, and again, where you're at in your career, what your market is, the size of the house is going to matter too. Obviously, the larger the house, the more photos you're going to take, and also the more that your real estate agent is going to make off of it, the more you should be charging.
Okay.
So, that number can go up significantly from that kind of baseline of $200.
200 bucks. Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense.
Real estate agents, for the most part, are reluctant to pay a lot. So I know a lot of people who do volume photography for less than that. Again, I'm doing more architectural photography and drone work now than I am real estate. I still am doing some. So I kind of have put that really pretty hard floor into my real estate photography.
Mm-hmm.
So then moving on to architectural photography. Now this one, there's a lot of different thoughts around it. And whether you do half day rate, full day rate, whether you split your creative fee from your editing fee, there's a lot of different ways to go about architectural photography. I know we had Barry McKenzie on a couple episodes ago, and he splits his editing fee and his creative fee. And the reason that he does that is because if they ask him to take a couple more shots on site, then he can charge more for editing because now there's more work to be done on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who do want to do half day or full day rates, which is what I do, I would recommend having maximum number of photos that you're willing to take for that price, and then saying anything extra will have an additional editing fee.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you say, okay, in a full day, I'm willing to shoot 15 photos. If we have time and, there are more shots that you as the client want, there is going to be this additional fee associated with it. Other fees that you need to think about are, if you're going to have an assistant, that might be something extra. Twilight, again, that might be extra. So there are definitely some varying things there to think about. For hotels as well, I usually do charge a little bit more for hotels just because of the amount of work that goes into it. So you're usually only able to do less shots than you would at maybe a standard architectural shoot.
Oh, okay.
So you're going to be there for longer, maybe longer days as well as more days. So usually for hotels, there's some wiggle room in terms of your pricing as well there, of kind of how you want to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where things are at. The architecture photography thing too, the pricing is really going to be based off of your name and what your market is in terms of what you can charge. Two things I would say: don't sell yourself short. Definitely make sure that you're charging enough, because if you're not charging enough, then your client's probably going to think that you don't have the experience.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
But at the same time, you don't want to charge too much. And I think it was Trent Bell was talking about this. I don't remember when, but I remember listening to it. And he was saying in his discussion was, come up with increments that you're comfortable with. If you're in real estate, maybe it's $50 or $100. If you're in architecture photography, maybe it's $250 or $500 increments, and just go from zero and start going up.
Okay.
And you're going to eventually get to, maybe like 3,000, 5,000, whatever it is. And you're gonna be like, that's too much. Like, that's a ridiculous amount to charge. Okay. Well, what are kind of some of the middle numbers that you're like, okay, that seems pretty reasonable. And then just pick one, so you're kind of going up in your increments, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, and pick the ones that feel right to you, and pick one of the three that's kind of in that middle range that seems good, but isn't too much. So I think that's maybe a good way for folks to kind of also plan and think about it.
Totally. And that's something that we've talked about a lot when you've said that to me before, and it's been good advice, when it comes to certain client things, that requests that I've had come through here and there.
Mm-hmm.
So, because you naturally, like you said, you don't want to charge too little, because then you're going to go to the shoot and be upset already before you get there and thinking, I'm getting, kind of taken here. But then you also don't want to lose the job altogether. So it's kind of finding that middle ground.
Yeah, it's a balance, and
Balance.
Every individual photographer needs to kind of find what that balance is,
Exactly.
what kind of works for them and what's going to work for their clients.
There we go.
All right. So I will push it over to you. And I think you're gonna hit on some of the landscape stuff in terms of pricing.
Yeah. So I figured, I get people asking me all the time, how do you do what you do? How do you, how do you like pay your bills, and how do you charge certain things for, different aspects of the career or the craft? And I would say that, so I wanted to just distill it down to talking more on prints, because, as a landscape photographer, ideally what you're doing is you're hopefully selling your work. Other photographers, or another way to do it is to run workshops and take other photographers to locations. And so I just really thought I'd focus on those two, prints and workshops, and kind of how I price myself, and then my work, and some thoughts on those. So, hitting on prints first, there's the, point one or part one, there's the limited edition, or, numbered print series, or not, kind of just open editions.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of discussion and curiosity as to why certain photographers go certain ways. I know photographers that go the artist proof way, with then numbered series, 250 prints of this image, and that's it. And I tend to go a little more on the open editions, if you will, where it's just I charge a little less, but I also don't have any limitations on to how many of those prints I can print in a lifetime. Um, so, I mean, there's arguments in both ways. And one is that by not doing, for those of you here listening and watching, thinking about like, what do you want to do? There is value add in doing a limited edition or series prints. For sure. It makes you desirable. It makes your work, desired. Um, but I mean, it's just all in what you want to do. There's certain photographers out there, and the thing is, at times, is there's certain photographers out there today that will do a limited edition, and then they'll sell out, and they realized it sold well, and then they'll change their like name of that series, so then they can kind of get around it to then sell
Yeah.
more of them.
And if
And
someone
then
bought the limited edition, then yeah, they'd be kind of a little frustrating.
right, and I mean, um, that's that there's one big photographer, like main most expensive selling landscape photographer, I'll only say that's kind of like the discussion that's come up with their methods and practices, as they went and did just limited edition, and then now there's the bronze, the gold, the silver, and it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
So and then that in ways kind of like on a whole, on a global, for photographers wanting to do limiteds, kind of makes it, well, certain buyers will be like, I don't want to buy a limited edition, because you could just switch the series name
Yeah.
someday. And
So
so
you so
that's,
you so you don't do limited edition.
I do not. I just do open editions, to where I, a client reaches out and they say, hey, I love this photo, I'd love to get it printed, and then we just discuss from there how they want it printed, the size they want it printed, mounting, all that. And then I work with them from the beginning to the end, and then that's on their wall. Um, so that's what I do. And the way that I've figured out my pricing is I have truly just gone to the point of the starting off. There's one way of going, all right, 3 times your production cost. So whatever your lab charges you to produce that print for that client,
Mm-hmm.
then you go 2 to 3 times. Um, we've talked about this, Adam, and it's like, where do you set that? And when do you kind of like, because 3 times can get really expensive if you're going to like a 72-inch long print by
Yeah.
like 48 inches tall, like that can get really costly. So I find that, as you go larger, bringing your pricing down a little bit per square inch can be really helpful to getting that end number that works well for the client.
Yep.
So I, starting off, I just thought, okay, how can I figure out really what makes the most sense here? So starting off and doing like a 2 to 3 times your production cost, I think is a great point to start with, and going up from there if you even want to. Also knowing the value of your work, like how hard was it for you to get that shot? How much effort did you put in? And then the bigger thing is, how good are you? And like in comparison, like, just being honest with yourself, and knowing that there are landscape gurus out there that are charging 70 cents an inch. Like, you might not want to charge $1 a square inch
Yeah.
if you're starting out. Um, so what I have done too, and I've when I had the college guy email me about a month ago, I just shared with him. I said, go online, look at some of your peers, if you will, or people that you want to be as good as someday, because he's in college, so he's just asking a lot of questions. And so I was like, go to their site, check out their prints page, and then look at like what are they selling a 40 by 60 for? What are they selling a 48 by 72 for? And divide that to get their cost per square inch. And you can
Yeah.
figure out how they're kind of running a formula on that. And you'll see that larger prints usually go down. Small prints are higher price because there's more effort involved in printing a very small print at a lab. They're going to charge
Yeah.
you more as well because man hours are all the same. So that's prints in a
Okay.
nutshell. Did I leave anything out there, do you think?
No, I
Or
mean, I think that's good. I think a lot of people kind of like wonder, well, how do I price my prints? So I think that's, again, a good baseline for people to kind of think about on the landscape side, of kind of a starting point of, okay, how can I kind of charge for my work?
yes. So that's, I think, like, in a nutshell, just there's not a lot of science behind. I mean, there doesn't have to be a ton. You know,
Yeah.
essentially, it's just if you go down the custom, putting things together for clients on the custom route, you got to figure out the cost that's going to come down the pipe to you as the photographer from your lab, and then build up from there.
Yeah.
If you want to just put prints on your site to sell, talk to your lab, figure out what they're going to charge you, and then just work out a formula that's going to work out for you that is going to cover your shipping, all of your tax, etc., and then just make it like a real simple like click to buy kind of thing on your site.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's a good thing too, make sure it's easy for the client to buy too. If you make it overly complicated.
oh, just simple, and like honestly, a lot of my stuff is just like I just kind of include tax and everything kind of into the print price, so it's not like all these things that get built onto it,
Yeah.
unless they're going massive, and then I've got to like figure out how to get it to them. Um,
Understand.
so the other one that the other aspect that we were going to talk about and I wanted to mention was and is workshops, and how I and also I don't know, I think a lot of landscape photographers price themselves in this. And again, there's always the, do I charge more? Do I build it all inclusive? Do I do all these things, like um, truly plan everything out, and including food and hotels and all that, and then just build a client so they just have kind of like that all inclusive aspect? Or do you want to go down the path of having it be a little more um, just kind of charge you for your time, or you charge them for your time, and
Yeah.
keep it a little simpler, but yet give them all the tools they need to arrive, to get their hotel, to do that sort of stuff. So um, I've gone both directions with this in past, and there's a lot to be said for both, like value. What I will say though is that the clients that you attract if you charge $10,000 per person also expect you to do a lot for that price tag. Um, I have found that the clients that if you charge them $2,000 for your time and let them figure out the rest, which it's not just dumping them off, and saying, here, figure it out. They're generally the clients that are a little more along the lines of like really wanting to be there, and um, willing to, deal with bad weather, deal with things that typically, that different demographic doesn't really want to participate in. That's been my experience, and that's kind of how I've done it. So um, I've found that I tend to like to charge just more for my time, and then block out hotel rooms, do different things, and that will let them, arrive to the location and the workshop on their own.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're charging for your time, but you are putting some structure around it. Like you said, you'll block hotel rooms and say, "Hey, here's where I recommend staying. I've blocked hotel
100%.
rooms,
Yeah,
or in that kind of stuff." But do you then? So you're expecting them to get there yourself, or themselves, I should say. You're blocking a hotel room for them, but then you're driving them around once they're there. So it's really just kind of getting to the point of the start of the workshop, essentially, that
exactly,
they have to take care
exactly.
of themselves.
Exactly. And and then I've found a lot of clients and a lot of people or participants, they, if you say like if you give them a 10,000, I'm just using as an arbitrary, but just as a
Yeah.
simple, you give them a $10,000 like price, here's all this, they'll ask, what does that cover? And then you break it down, you're like, well, that's your meals, that's your accommodation, that's time, all this. Then you'll get people who will say, well, I'm not necessarily going to eat, like I I don't want to, you start getting into those like, well, I don't like to eat this. I don't want to do that. And it just, so you're right. So I've gone more like, hey, you pay for your meals, you pay for your hotel, because you might want to use hotel points, or
Yeah.
your Ramada points, or, there's just so many elements involved that I think it's more of a value add in a lot of ways to just really give the client and the person the tools to do everything on their own and get there. And then, you walk them, you basically hold their hand through that anyway, but they just are able to make their free choice
To, yeah, do it themselves.
to
And
do it
then
themselves.
do you do like a hosted like dinner or like night, like editing stuff at night then too? So I mean there's more structure around it than
Yeah,
just the photography. So but
absolutely.
what I'm saying though is just from what's your time, how much are you going to charge? There's a lot of components of your time that
Yeah.
you need to think about.
It's all like some photographers have editing sessions, some don't, it's just, but that's another thing that you have to kind of take into consideration what you're charging and how long, like how many days are you doing this. And
Hmm.
so yeah, so it's always, like I like to go and the very first evening you get to or afternoon you get together, you settle in, you have dinner together, go out, you shoot, you come back, you do a sunrise session, you edit the next day, you sunset session, sunrise the next day, editing session. So like middle of the day is always built around editing. It's tons of time, out in the field together. And you know driving around people and also working together like pre-COVID was perfect. You spend a ton of time together like that. Now in this era that we're in, it's a little harder. So now it's been a little more of like arrive to the location, you drive your own car, we wear masks. There's a lot more
Logistics around it. Yeah.
logistics, yeah, and safety measures and like kind of protocol with that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, and it's really just kind of figuring out what your time is worth.
Yeah.
And
And I
that's
think that goes to kind of all of the pricing. I mean, I talked about the drone, the architecture, the real
yes,
estate,
yeah,
what's you at the end of the day, part of it is again, what's your name brand worth, but what's your market area, how much can you charge in your market, but then also it's like, what's your time worth? And that's why in the real estate, I put a bottom floor on what I'm willing to charge
right,
to go out and do it because my time isn't worth anything less than that. Um, again, on the architecture side of things, there's factors. There's the on-site, which is your creative, and then there's the editing. Do you want to bundle that as a day fee? Do you want to split those out? And how do you want to do that? So, I think thinking about all of the things that go into the time of it is important because whether it's a workshop, architecture shoot, a hotel shoot, there's tons of preparation that's involved in that. And
mm-hmm.
so that needs to be taken into consideration a little bit as well. So I
As
mean,
well, yeah,
if I'm charging $3,000 for an architecture for a 1 day shoot, well, I'm not making $3,000 a day because there was time leading up to it, the business
right,
development, the marketing, all of those things. Then there was the shooting, and then there's the editing on the back end.
right,
So there's a lot to it. Plus, again, we talked about equipment with the drone a little bit too. So I mean, there's so many different factors that go into what's your time worth and how much you should be charging for each
exactly, yeah.
individual job that you're doing.
Factoring, all those overhead costs like your business insurance, the your car, your automobile, like your cell phone, like all that stuff, kind of factors in.
Yeah, and that goes to something that I see a lot online, and I don't like it, and I'll be interested to your take. People always say like, okay, well, how much do you want to make in a year? Is it 20? Is your profit want to be 25,000, 50,000, $100,000 a year, and then just divide by your estimated number of jobs, and then that's how much you should charge. Um, I've never been a fan of that, just because there's so many factors that go into how much money you can make and how much money you should be charging. It shouldn't just
Right.
be like, well, I want to make $50,000 a year. I want to make $100,000 a year. Um, and you just don't know what your volume is going to be. You could get, you could have higher volume. You could be pricing yourself out of jobs
Yep.
because you're like, no, I'm only going to charge whatever, $2,000 for this product, and everyone's like, I'm not paying $2,000 just because
Right.
you want to make $100,000 a year,
Yeah. Right.
or
And that,
whatever. So,
yeah. Yeah.
um,
I've never gone about it that way personally. I
yeah,
mean, there is something to be said about those individuals like that. I think that's really coming at it from like a purely business mind approach, uh, or not purely, but just with that in mind.
mhm.
I've never done that. It's always been just more of, you know, work hard to try to get jobs and then price yourself accordingly and fairly. And then, and then as you get better, you can charge more, kind of like how, everyone evolves and we grow, and then I don't know. I think it's just more of like a growth process rather than like an expected net, or gross.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is you never know where you're going to be. I mean, when I first started out, I was making a lot less than I am now. Part of that is I've been able to charge more.
Hmm.
Part of that is, I have some good consistent clients
Yeah.
that, come back to me. But I think if I had just set out and said, I need to be making 50,000, 75,000, whatever the number is, I think you miss out on work because of that, because you have this set end number in mind.
Yeah.
And
Very well.
sometimes it can take you some time to get there. And
Yeah.
so again, you might be missing volume, you might be missing pricing. If that's going to work for you, I'm not saying don't do it. I just have some reservations about it. And I've never understood why someone would set their pricing based on that. I think there's so many other factors that can go into pricing that make more sense than that.
Right. Which naturally, I mean, I think like at the end of the day, having a goal of like, I want to make 100,000 this year isn't a bad thing, but it's just, I'd let that be more of like a motivator to acquire more clients, get better at your
Exactly.
craft, deliver better work,
Hmm.
uh, hustle, basically just hustle harder.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
yeah,
And
cool.
we've talked about landscape photography. We talked about like architectural real estate photography. There's portrait and wedding photography and all these other genres. I
Yeah.
mean, and their pricing is going to vary too. And it's a lot of, I think the things are going to be very similar. I mean, if you're a portrait photographer, family portraits, you might have to start out charging $150, $250. And then as you get better, you might be able to charge $500, $750 for, a 1 or 2 hour session and only deliver, 5 to 10 photos.
Yep.
On the wedding side, there's so many different prices based off of, where your name is at. So
Right.
I think,
Yeah.
again, all of this just kind of goes back to know where you are in your career.
Yeah.
Um, don't undersell yourself and don't sell yourself short, but also don't oversell yourself either. So you
Right.
have to kind of find that balance. And that's why, again, I mentioned that Trent Bell kind of tier of, set your increments of whatever, 50, 75, $100, 250, 500,
Hmm.
and kind of see, okay, what makes sense? Where do you feel comfortable, and kind of push that if you're really completely unsure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think the last thing that I want to say is keep it simple. If you overcomplicate your rate sheet and your pricing, it's going to turn people off.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if you have your set rate, and then if you have a couple add-ons, that's fine. But if you start getting into, 5, 10, 15 different line items on an invoice or a proposal,
Hmm.
people are just going to put their hands up and say, like, I can't, it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. And I think that goes to a little bit what you were saying with the workshops, just say,
Yeah.
because
Just
people
keep
are
it
like, well,
simple.
what does this include?
Yep.
It's like, set a price,
Yep.
kind of keep it simple.
Just keep it simple. Yeah. Basically, you just charge just the one thing, and then just I don't know. Yeah. Just keep it real simple.
Yeah. Again, I think if you start to get to like 5, 10 light items, that might just get confusing for people, whether you're, a
Yeah.
workshop where it's like, here's how much it costs to have me here. Here's how much, your plane ticket is in the hotel. Like, no,
No.
just keep it simple.
Well, cool, man. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of touch on, or because I think this has been a fun episode, just talking about these different aspects and
Yeah.
really important key points.
Yeah, I mean, I think have resources that you can leverage. I mean, that's part of building your network and building your community, because we talk about pricing all the time. Even though I think we both have set rates for stuff, there's always exceptions and different
Yeah,
projects that come in. And so having someone that you can kind of bounce a price off of and say, hey, how does this sound, I think is good. Um, Also, I
right.
think being a little bit flexible with your pricing is important. I mean, if you want to get a new client, it's okay to say, hey, this is a, first time client discount.
Yeah,
If you're going to use me all the time, I'll give you a, exclusive photographer
exactly.
discount. There's lots of different ways that you can fluctuate and make some adjustments to your pricing to try and lure new clients in
Yep.
or keep clients
And keep
while
clients.
working with your pricing. And I think that does remind me though too, licensing can be such a big, good extra way to make money um, on the architectural side of things. So don't be afraid to license your photos to other people in the project. If you're hired by the architect,
Mhm.
see if the general contractor and the end use client of that space wants the photos, and you can charge, everybody less, and you end up making more money for delivering the same photos
Yeah,
to 3 different clients. So think of creative ways that you can, find ways to make extra money off of each individual shoot.
that's wisdom.
So we could have a whole episode on image licensing on the architectural side of things and how to price that out and kind of what some of the benefits are, and just throw up some numbers. I mean, so we could maybe do that at some point. But if you have questions about it, shoot us a note. We'll happily kind of talk you through kind of some of that
Awesome.
image licensing and how it works, because that is a great extra way to reduce the cost to your clients,
Yeah.
but actually end up making a lot more money for
Hmm.
doing no extra work
No extra work.
other than sending an email with the photos.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. As always, you can find us on YouTube at In Focus Videocast. We are also on iTunes and Spotify, Stitcher, all of your favorite podcast locations. Go find us there. You can take us on the go. If you don't want to see our faces, or if you don't have time to listen to YouTube, but you're in your car, we are at In Focus Videocast there as well. Feel free to email us. We want your questions, comments, feedback to infocusvideocast@gmail.com.
Yeah. And then for sure, if hit the like button or, reviews and all that, because that
Subscribe.
definitely
Tell your
helps.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely helps our ranking go up.
Yeah. And we'd appreciate that. So,
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Cool, man. Well, always good to see you, Adam.
Yeah. Likewise. And again, we're trying to crank these out here again a little bit more regularity. So thanks for your patience. And Joe,
Yeah.
always a pleasure, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Dude, likewise. Good to see you. And thanks everybody for tuning in on this one, and looking forward to catching you next week.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks
All
everyone.
right.
Take care. Bye.